This episode of the Construction Record is brought to you by the Ontario Sewer and Water Main Construction Association. Clean water is everybody's business.
Hello everyone and welcome to episode 73 of the Construction Record podcast. This is Vince Versace, National Managing Editor of the Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce, joining you today. As a reminder, this podcast is supported by ConExpo ConAg. Check out North America's largest construction show, which will hit the stage in Las Vegas from March 10th to the 14th next year. With over 2,000 exhibitors, there is much to see and do during the show. Save 40% on show admission when you register by January 17th. Visit conexpoconag.com for more registration and event information. And as a reminder, this huge show that is going to take over Las Vegas from a construction point of view, we're going to be at it. This podcast, the Construction Record, is a supporting podcast of the show, so both Warren Fry and I will be there. Our loyal listeners have heard us say this before, and I'll say it again. We're looking forward to being there in Vegas, because to have a North American construction audience that we can interact with, network with, get to know, we think will provide us with a lot of great stories to develop and intel to share with our readers and listeners. So please stay tuned for some upcoming Construction Record episodes where we're going to be doing some bit more in-depth previews around ConExpo ConAg. So stay tuned for that. I do have another sponsorship note, and this one's from the Ontario Sewer and Water Main Construction Association. They wanted us to let our listeners know that the 2020 OSWCA conference is going to be taking place from February 9th to the 12th next year. Conference registration is now open, and there are also sponsorship opportunities available. New for 2020 at the conference, there will be 2 educational seminar streams, a management stream and an owner stream. As well, besides the educational seminars, there's plenty of networking opportunities and team building events at the conference. It's very worthwhile. We've attended it, we've covered it. As far as folks that are involved in heavy civil and sewer and water main, this is the conference to be at. So please, if you want more information, visit oswcaconference.com and you'll be able to find registration information and session and conference information there. Now on to the news. Our staff have been busily working away like Santa's elves on National Newsmaker of the Year stories, Ontario Newsmaker of the Year stories, and Western Canadian Newsmaker of the Year stories. These 3 stories in particular, on these 3 themes, will be published on both the DCN website and JOC website between now, which is December 20th, and the end of the year, December 31st. From a national point of view, we had Don Wall working on that story. He talked to John Gamble from the Association of Consulting Engineers Company Canada. He talked to Mary Van Buren, president of CCA, and he spoke to Arlene Dunn, director of the Canada Building Trades Unions. In talking to John thought, from an ACEC point of view, that the Newsmaker of the Year story was Public Services and Procurement Canada launching 4 pilot projects which will use QBS, Qualifications-Based Selection, as the key factor in bidding analysis. I know John's been beating this drum for a long time. I've been here 13 years, and it was one of the first conversations John and I had 13 years ago, was the merits of QBS and the usage of it. John has acknowledged that QBS is an obscure topic for some, but for architects and engineers, it's a significant issue. This is what he said. There are now 4 projects on the street. It's not one of these programs that captures the public's imagination, but it's very important. For many years, I questioned whether I would ever see the day, but it shows a lot of forward thinking by the department. In talking to Mary Van Buren, there were 2 things she mentioned as the Newsmakers of the Year in construction nationally. One was the progress on federal prompt payment legislation, which received royal assent in June of this year. And the second story she mentioned was the progress on the Trans Mountain pipeline. We put Trans Mountain high in terms of impact on investor confidence, said Mary Van Buren. Its impact on environmental assessments, bringing awareness to infrastructure, and it is of national importance, she said. Trans Mountain is an important story for Canada and how we move through these projects more effectively going forward. And lastly, Arlene Dunn of the Canadian Building Trades Unions what she mentioned as the Newsmaker of the Year in construction nationally was actually the body of work by former federal labor minister Patty Hajdu. Arlene pointed to the new apprenticeship strategy, which has a mandate to address barriers to entry, which was also launched. And also she pointed to the Canada Training Benefit, which will offer credits of $250 per year to workers through the ages of 25 to 24, which they can put towards their skills training. In particular, as far as Minister Hajdu, this is what Arlene had to say. Minister Hajdu never shied away from rolling up her sleeves and working closely with the construction industry to truly understand the issues that matter to our membership and the sector at large. Her support of skills trades training and the diversification of the workforce in the construction sector has resulted in significant tangible gains in terms of increasing the number of women in the skilled trades. So that's a Don Wall story. It will be appearing at the end of the year on both the DCN and JOC websites. So stay tuned for it. You can read it in its entirety. On to the Ontario Construction Newsmaker of the Year. We had Angela Gismonde on that story. Angela talked to 9 stakeholders in the industry here in Ontario, and one common thread came true through all those interviews. And that thread was that it was the Premier Doug Ford government which was the Newsmaker of the Year in construction for 2019. There were a variety of initiatives which they launched, which we covered intensely, because at the time there was some pretty heavy debate. Starting off, let's say, with the dissolution of the Ontario College of Trades. That was a big deal. That was a big newsmaker. And the introduction of portable skill sets was one. The introduction, the passing of Bill 66, which was called Restoring Ontario's Competitiveness Act in the spring. In particular, that act closed a loophole which allowed certain municipalities to be deemed as construction employers. That was a big story. We had Karen Renkema from the Progressive Contractors Association of Canada speak to that. And Karen said, there tends to be a broad consensus among the provincial and municipal governments on fairness, equity, and competition, and embracing and understanding those concepts as it comes to building public infrastructure. That's a pretty important win for us. That means the closing of that loophole. When we look at Bill 66, it wasn't all positive for some folks. We also talked to Pat Dillon, business manager of the Provincial Building and Construction Trades Council in Ontario, and this is what he had to say about Bill 66. The bill is nothing short of a full-scale attack on free collective bargaining rights targeting construction workers in the province of Ontario, said Dillon. We find it a real challenge to our charter rights. The Building Trades Council is contemplating a constitutional challenge to the legislation. Interesting. We know it's a big deal. We've been covering it for years, the designation of construction employers in Ontario, and to see it that loophole being now eliminated has provided it seemed to be a bit more positive reaction than negative reaction in Ontario. So, and you can read through on our past coverage this year on that topic. Just type in Bill 66 and you're going to get quite a few results. Also, as far as a provincial newsmaker of the year story in Ontario, was the introduction of the Supporting Ontario Safe Employers program. This program formally recognizes employers who successfully implement health and safety programs in their workplaces. They receive financial rewards coming in the form of rebates. In particular, the Ontario General Contractors Association was involved in working with the province and consulting with the province, in particular the Ministry of Labour and the WSIB on that topic. Clive Thurston had this to say about that work. It was a collaborative approach that has led to a really positive outcome, said Thurston. Ian Cunningham, president of the Council of Canadian Construction Associations, said, this program is designed to encourage employers, regardless of their current level of health and safety management, to get on board to the journey to excellence. This kind of collaboration should be a business school case study and deserves recognition. We also talked to Richard Lyle, president of the Residential Construction Council of Ontario. And in particular, Richard brought some perspective from the residential construction point of view, because that's what his association represents. And he said one of the biggest events concerned the residential construction industry's collective agreements, which were renegotiated in the spring. It was a furtherance of our industry's ability to generally maintain stability in that environment, and that's a credit to both labor and management, said Lyle. Then he also pointed to the Provincial Bill 108, More Housing, More Choice Act. He said that obviously Rescon was heavily involved with that, and this is how he described it. It was the most comprehensive changes to housing policy in a generation, said Lyle. It has taken a big swipe at trying to fix the problem in housing, which is trying to match demand with supply. It was the first evidence of a provincial government wanting to fix the problem. Now, that's what our interviews ended up digging out, both on a national and provincial level, as far as Newsmaker of the Year. I still think it's the drum that I beat last year in a group discussion that we had on this podcast about the story of the year. And I still think this topic holds true today. I still think the constrained labor markets in Canada are the story of the year. They are the driver for a lot of the change and implementation of strategies around overcoming barriers as far as apprenticeship and attracting labor force for the future for construction, both nationally and in Ontario and in a variety of jurisdictions. Simply put, there's a shortage of workers out there. The looming labor shortage that we've been talking about for over a decade the early wave has now hit construction. And we're starting to see projects that aren't, rising up out of the ground because you can't find enough labor. In particular in markets in the Lower Mainland and Vancouver and here in Toronto, it is tight. Any worker that's available seems to be on a job site at the moment, if we believe what we're hearing in interviews that we do, stories that we do, and the economic analysis that we see from very different bodies. So for me, I still think the skilled labor shortage is the story of the year in construction, both nationally and provincially here in Ontario. But you know what? Everyone's entitled to their opinion. And if you read our stories, both the National Newsmaker of the Year stories and the Provincial Newsmaker of the Year stories, you'll see that certain stakeholders, from their point of view, have a certain lens and scope in how they interact with the industry, and certain issues really percolate to the front for them. Sure, they're dealing with the skilled labor shortage, but in the end they have other issues, such as John Gamble talking about QBS, Mary Van Buren talking about the progress on the Trans Mountain Pipeline, whether it's Bill 66 here in Ontario, whether it's the abolition of OCOT and pushing through an accreditation standard. This industry is involved in a lot of topics and issues. And to have one clear-cut winner some year is tough. And that's what we found in doing our stories on the national and Ontario front. And I'm sure when you listen to Russ and Warren talk in the next segment, you'll see it was pretty hard too, also from a Western Canadian front, to really nail down one story that was the story of the year. So with that, before I throw to the Burnaby studio, I want to wish all our listeners and all our readers a happy holiday. Thank you so much for your support. This year has been a banner year, in particular for this podcast, in the honors that we've received, whether it was through FeedSpot being recognized as one of the top 15 construction podcasts on the internet, whether it was from Construction Junkie and the voting that happened there, in which we finished second in the North American Best Podcast competition, whether it's just the increased feedback we get and the increase in subscriptions and readers and downloads. You're engaged with us and we're engaged with you. And we thank you for your support. We love covering this industry, whether it's through the podcast or our newspapers. We love delivering the stories that tell a bigger picture than you usually see when it comes to construction in commercial media. It's our pleasure and it's our honor to do so through the DCN and JOC brands, and now this Construction Record podcast brand. With that, once again, happy holidays, everyone. Stay well, enjoy the time with your families, and thank you.
This episode of the Construction Record is brought to you by the Greater Toronto Sewer and Water Main Contractors Association. Clean water, our goal, our future.
Thanks, Vince. Here we are in Burnaby. It's me, Warren Fry, digital media editor for the Journal of Commerce.
I'm Russell Hickson, staff writer for the Journal.
And just like on the DCN side, we've got a whole bunch of end of the year reflecting to do, and a bunch of big stories that I'm sure some of which were covered in the previous segment. I'd say the biggie of the year would probably have to be Trans Mountain, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's a pretty big one. I mean, there's a lot of, I feel like there's kind of, it's hard to, at the end of the year, to remember everything. But see, these are some of the things that kind of stuck out to me. And yeah, Trans Mountain is something that, especially here in the West, that the industry has been very strong supporters of.
It reminds me of when a movie comes out in like March, and then by next March the Academy Awards come up, and you're like, oh yeah, that movie.
Yes.
Because this was so early on, like it was around that time, earlier this year, and then everything else has been kind of spillover from that, but it's been this back and forth where they keep getting taken to court, they're putting shovels in the ground, they aren't. But,
it's definitely been one of those projects that's had its ups and downs, and it ain't over till it's over.
And it ties in actually directly to the election. Actually, weirdly enough, it doesn't tie in that much to the election. The Conservatives sure tried to make it tie in, but it didn't really take, surprisingly enough. But that was the other kind of one of the other big stories. The Trudeau government, despite SNC and other unsavory stuff, got back in.
Yeah, and I think this is especially prominent in the minds of people who live in Alberta and the prairies, where Trudeau saw almost no support.
I don't think he saw any support voting-wise.
And the people that I talk to in Alberta in our industry, they're still seeing a lot of effects of the economic downturn. So they're frustrated, and to not support, to have the vast majority of that part of the country not support Trudeau, but have him get reelected, I'm sure a lot of them are probably pretty frustrated.
And it harkens back to I'm old enough to remember not even the first wave, but one of the waves of Western alienation in the 80s. And this seems, I'm not in Alberta, so I couldn't tell you. I was in Alberta at the time, and it did seem pretty intense. And it was kind of the same old with Trudeau's dad. so what goes around comes around. What else we got here? The Builders Code was a thing that got introduced earlier in the year, and essentially what it is it's an attempt to get companies to sign on to a sort of list or code of conduct, and to encourage
a voluntary
voluntary code of conduct to encourage women, Indigenous people, people with disabilities, others who are currently not represented as much as they should be, into the trades, and while they're in there, actually, this is the more important part, staying in the trades, because what they were saying is that without changing the culture, people are not going to stay in the trades. And so it was the BCCA, the British Columbia Construction Association, was a big part of it, but the government was also a part of it. The Minerva Society was part of it. There are a lot of different organizations behind this, and I wouldn't say progress has been super fast or anything, but I don't think they intend it to be super fast.
Yeah, I've interviewed people who advocate for women in construction, and some of them have been critical of the Builders Code. I think it all goes back to labor, and the industry is not stupid. Everybody knows that they have to source labor in the coming years, and a huge part of that is attracting minorities to the industry who in the past have not always felt very welcome.
And in the case of women, not even a minority.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely interesting. I think related to that, you've also seen some strong supporters of women in construction kind of get put in more positions of power recently.
That's true.
Which should also definitely shake things up in this area. And so I think 2020 will be definitely a very interesting year as the push to try and recruit more women and more Indigenous peoples and other parts of the population kind of intensify.
And just anecdotally, and this is not scientific or anything, but I've noticed when I've gone to cover award shows and industry gatherings, there is definitely a shift happening. You can tell that the old white guy retirement wave is starting to retire, if not in the middle of retirement.
The industry is very self-aware that they need to recruit more women, and
you're seeing more.
Yes, you absolutely are. There's also several legal cases that I think are interesting. The first that I'll start with, both of them have been simmering for a long time, but the first one that I'll start with is something that I think the industry is starting to take more notice of, especially recently, especially since it seems like the case it's over and done with. There's nothing else that can be done with it. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and it's about reprisal clauses. So it started right here in our backyard in the city of Burnaby. This goes back years and years and years. An excavation company, J. Coate and Son, and they had a dispute with the city and took them to court over payment for a contract that they had. And according to the city's clause in their contract, their policy, that company was banned for 2 years from doing work with the city. And this is something that has been happening more and more in the past few years. More and more municipalities have similar-ish clauses, from what I've been told from procurement experts. And so this has just worked its way through the courts, and the courts have essentially said, no, these types of clauses, at least in this specific case, in the Burnaby case, are okay. And the company and its legal team was trying to argue that you are violating our right to access legal remedy by imposing a penalty if we do so. So while it's not incredibly common for companies to take others to court, it should be kind of a last resort. It's definitely something that I think people in the industry are concerned about, and I think people have been concerned about it for a while. But it took kind of like a specific case working its way through the courts to kind of highlight the issue, and I'm not sure what's going to happen with this because the courts have spoken. It's kind of done at this point.
And you mentioned there's another case that ties into this.
Yes. So there was a rock scaler who was killed by falling rock at a site, and he worked for a company called Hewitt, and they were criminally charged for his death recently.
I'm assuming is pretty rare.
It's extremely rare. I believe they charged under the Westray Act.
Right, yes. Disaster.
And it took years and years and years of pressure from the family and from steel unions. Steel unions got involved. They weren't even involved in the project, or this worker wasn't even a steel worker, but the unions felt so strongly about this case, they started imposing pressure. And I believe they were involved in the original Westray case that got the Westray Act on the books. So, I mean, I've been hearing from people in the industry for years, why even have these laws if they're never used? And this is a case where it's been used, and it's going to go to trial in next November. So it should be interesting to see what happens there, because the company has been criminally charged. So yeah, that's something that is going to be of great interest, I think, to the industry.
And I've got one more thing that is less a event that happened and more a trend I've noticed, and that's that technology seems to have gotten past, though we have to get this into the industry stage, and it's now in the industry stage, and it's also gotten past the here's the latest hype thing to, oh, this is how this stuff actually works. And how it actually works is it's actually people are getting deluged with data. Before they didn't have any data and it was on paper, and now it's the exact opposite problem, if it's a problem. So it's interesting to see how we're kind of in the middle ground now with technology, and so how it's going to shake itself out. But we're at the point where enough people have iPads on the job and access to models and all the rest of it that there's just more. It's just kind of happening now. It's bubbling under, not even under the surface, on the surface. So it'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out next year and in the years down the road. Because inevitably that's what happens with technology. You get a big hype curve that goes into that, people actually using it, problems occur, and we're not quite at the problems occur part yet, or maybe people in the field can tell me that I'm wrong about that. Maybe I very well might be. But then that gets shaken out, and then it just becomes the background. So after years and years of people going, we need to improve technology in this industry, now it's happening, and we're going to see what comes up in the next couple of years.
Yeah, you're even seeing like major companies start to come out and develop their own kind of data management systems for when they're building, and when they hand the keys over, they're like, not only do you get this building, but here's all this data and all this data collecting infrastructure for you to monitor, building performance and et cetera, that they use during the construction process. So that's interesting as well.
And one thing I heard from a couple of different experts is that these systems used to be very proprietary and never talk to each other, and now they are. And that's kind of key to the whole thing, is that everything is talking to everything else, and it's kind of helping everyone to sort of integrate everything together. And then this brings in stuff like, doing lean construction becomes a lot easier, and it's just interesting. There'll be knock-on effects just like there is with anything else.
Well, there's also the added value of you can attract a lot more younger people, a lot more people who may not think about the construction industry as a tech industry, and you can kind of capture those people and bring them on board, which I think a lot of people in the industry are excited about.
Yeah, like I've seen people operating like simulators where they're and that's what'll get. Let's listen. people have been raised on video games, myself included, and
Yeah.
so when you see that, you're like, oh no, I get this I can understand.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with going to a school and showing kids a tool belt, but when you can go to a school and put on some VR goggles and show them that not only are you just like a laborer, but you can be a high tech, high skill worker. I think that's really cool, and I think that's going to be a really valuable tool going forward in trying to draw more people into the industry and have them consider it as a career, a high tech career.
Although, just like anything else, you're going to have to learn those tools first and then get to the shiny high tech goggles.
Right.
All right, so I guess that's pretty much it for this year, and Christmas has just happened as of this going out, this recording. But we all wish you all a happy New Year and a very prosperous one as well.
Yeah. We'll see you in 2020.